What? He could take it all over with just a few words. Wow. Yeah, I've never seen that before. Hey, you think he's gonna do it? Yeah, call me back. Let me know. Okay. April 22nd, 1951. Douglas MacArthur is back in the United States, being received by huge, adoring crowds everywhere he stops en route to Washington, D.C. And what does he do when he gets there? Douglas MacArthur speaks. I'm Indy Neidell, and this is the Korean War. Last week in the field, the UN forces failed to take Hwacheon Dam, and Operation Dauntless kicked off. But the big news, the global oh my god news, was UN Forces Commander Douglas MacArthur being relieved of his command by US President Harry Truman. MacArthur's replacement is former 8th Army Commander Matt Ridgway. This week on the 16th, Ridgway meets his staff for the first time after taking command of UN forces. This is after attending MacArthur's departure ceremony. Ridgway's first order is to appoint Mac's acting Chief of Staff Doyle Hickey to be his new Chief of Staff. Hickey, who was officially MacArthur's Deputy Chief of Staff, has been acting chief since September, when the official chief, Ned Allman, took over 10th Corps before the Incheon landings. Ridgway has felt that Hickey being only acting chief instead of official chief the past 6 months has been kind of insulting to the man. Ridgway then issues orders to his generals and admirals the rest of the week. But there's nothing that's a huge change. Jim Van Fleet, now running 8th Army in Korea, has pretty much the same mandate Ridgway had at that post: repel aggression against South Korea. He can operate above the 38th parallel, but not above the Kansas and Wyoming lines without Ridgway signing off on it. And all operations are first and foremost to inflict the greatest personnel and material losses on the enemy, and not just to gain ground. Van Fleet can also operate on the assumption that he is not going to get any major reinforcements, and that, at some point, he might be ordered to just hold a defensive line or even leave Korea. Unlike MacArthur, though, Ridgway demands, especially from his air and naval forces, that all commanders avoid any actions that might widen the war, like attacking China or the Soviet Union directly. Today, the 22nd, Van Fleet has his first press conference. He explains what I just mentioned. I will talk about Van Fleet a little more in the coming weeks. But one thing important to mention now is that he got his third star in 1948 when he was assigned to head an American military advisory group to Greece during the Greek Civil War. His assistance was instrumental in the defeat of the communist forces, and one of his big projects there was building up the Greek army and making it more organized and efficient and effective. I say this because here in Korea, the first part of the front he visits is the ROK, South Korean, held section in the east. Now, months ago, South Korean President Syngman Rhee requested more American arms and equipment to outfit more South Korean soldiers. But MacArthur recommended that Washington not do that, and recommended that same again this month on the 6th. He didn't think their past performance indicated that anything would be gained by making it larger. U.S. Army Chief of Staff Lightning Joe Collins, however, recommended Van Fleet for the job running 8th Army precisely so he could improve the ROK forces the way he did with the army in Greece. So Van Fleet meets some ROK bigwigs already the 16th, which is a good quiet time to do so because ROK 1st Corps has had no contact with the enemy for a solid week by then, and have even sent patrols 25 kilometers north of Yangyang on the coast without meeting the Chinese or the KPA, the North Koreans. ROK 3rd Corps in the mountains hasn't met the enemy for a few days either. And this is true of even the mainly American forces west of them. U.S. 10th Corps is consolidating along the Kansas line from the 16th, and the enemy has dissolved in front of them. Same with 9th Corps beside them. They've been advancing as part of Operation Dauntless, which is an advance into the Iron Triangle. And by the 17th, Phase 1 of that operation is a success. However, intelligence officers appraised the voluntary withdrawal ahead of the two 9th Corps divisions as a realignment of forces with those dropping back in the Dauntless sector, but did not overlook the possibility that the Chinese were coaxing the 9th Corps into a vulnerable deployment. A recently captured document dated March 17th told the virtues and explained the purpose of roving defensive warfare, defined as defense through movement without regard for the loss or gain of ground, which could conserve our own power, deplete the enemy's strength, and secure for us more favorable conditions for future victory. In U.S. First Corps' sector's center, units reached the Utah line last week on the 14th, and though on the Corps' right, U.S. 25th and 24th Divisions faced stiff resistance for several days from the PVA 26th and 40th Armies, the PVA is the Chinese, while advancing on Chorwan and Kimhwa, by the 17th, that resistance is fading away. By the 20th, both divisions are along the Utah line, except for the Turkish brigade attached to 25th Division, who are held up by a delaying force on Route 33. The western part of 1st Corps has even gained enough ground that they're strung out along the Imjin River from its mouth all the way to below Chorwan. That front is so long that it's mostly being manned now by a series of separated battalion strongpoints. But that front has developed to where it is over the whole month, and they've patrolled all over north of the river, even as far as Kaesong. Okay, from the 10th, they do encounter scattered Chinese forces, which might indicate that they've sent force forward, but even by the 20th, there's no real evidence of massed enemy formations opposing them. It gets weirder. Perhaps the most dramatic, certainly the most visible evidence of enemy activity to appear as 8th Army forces closed in on the Kansas and Utah lines were billows of smoke rising at numerous points ahead of them. By mid-April, belts of smoke up to 10 miles deep lay before much of the 1st, 9th, and 10th Corps fronts. Air observers confirmed that enemy troops, some in groups of 50 to 500, were setting fire to grasslands and brush. Some observers reported that smoke generators also were being used. Fires doused by rain showers were rekindled. Maritime air that frequently stagnated over the battlefront added sea haze and moisture to the smoke and produced smog. This actually prevents aerial recon and airstrikes on several days. But what is it for? Oh, okay, smoke can be used to shield large-scale daytime troop movements, sure. But there really isn't much evidence of any of that. Still, by the 20th, Van Fleet's intelligence chief Jim Tarkenton says that although he can't be more specific, he's pretty sure the Chinese will attack before or on May the 1st. That date also having particular significance to communists as International Workers' Day. However, his daily incoming reports all describe the enemy as being in a defensive stance. Well, since everyone is at the Utah or Kansas lines, and there are no signs that the enemy offensive is impending, Van Fleet tells everyone to kick off dauntless Phase 2. This involves 1st and 9th Corps moving up to the Wyoming line from the 21st, and U.S. 10th, ROK 3rd, and ROK 1st Corps advancing to take the road north of the South Koreans that runs up to the coastal highway like 40 kilometers north of Yangyang from tomorrow the 24th. Also the 21st, ROK 6th Division and 1st Marine Division from U.S. 9th Corps advance as far as 8 kilometers north of the Kansas line with no opposition. But 25th Division further west attacks towards Chorwan and comes under pretty heavy artillery fire and tough fighting right at the Utah line. But none of the Corps find any evidence of enemy offensive preparations. Summing up the day's findings late on the 21st, the 8th Army's G2, Tarkenton, reported that his information still was not firm enough to indicate the nearness of the impending enemy offensive with any degree of certainty. A worrisome fact was that a lack of offensive signs did not necessarily mean that the opening of the offensive was distant. In preparing past attacks, Chinese forces had successfully concealed their locations until they moved into forward assembly areas immediately before they attacked. Last night, 1st Corps patrols do run into Chinese positions that are closer to the Imjin and stronger than they've been lately. However, today the 22nd, Hwachon Dam falls to the 1st South Korean Marine Corps Regiment and does so without a fight. However, during the day, prisoners taken from several Chinese divisions indicate that the Chinese 9th Army Group has reached the front, and several prisoners even report the enemy offensive will begin before the day is over. Funny about the Chinese, and just them being here. They unknowingly are a big part of why MacArthur was removed from command. 2 weeks ago, I mentioned at the end of the episode that Harry Truman, thanks to the NSA listening in on wire traffic, found that Douglas MacArthur told Portuguese and Spanish diplomats that he was certain he could turn the Korean War into a larger war with China. This was the final straw for Truman, and MacArthur had to be removed from command. Despite his assurances to Washington that he would obey policy, he had told foreign governments that he intended to do no such thing, that he would continue until he forced the United States into what he considered a necessary wider war. But the source of information meant that neither Truman nor anyone else in the administration could use it publicly. The United States, in 1951, was not about to admit that it snooped on friendly countries. Had Truman been able to reveal the Portuguese and Spanish conversations, MacArthur would have been destroyed overnight. Americans might accept MacArthur's public criticism of U.S. policy as an extended form of free speech, but conniving to reverse policy was another matter entirely. And MacArthur's popularity has made this a real issue, and it's blown up to enormous proportions. MacArthur leaves Japan, driving past crowds of an estimated 200,000 people on his way to Atsugi Airport. For MacArthur, the next days are a montage of admiring crowds, laudatory speeches, and public adulation, the outpourings of a citizenry eager to pay homage to a personage of mythical stature. Hawaii, San Francisco, tens of thousands of people everywhere he goes. And Truman? Well, he is burned in effigy, and countless "Oust President Truman" bumper stickers adorn cars pretty much overnight. The Illinois, Michigan, California, and Florida state legislatures pass resolutions that condemn Harry Truman. Truman is even booed at the first Washington Senators baseball team's home game, though not when he throws out the first pitch, but when he leaves. William Randolph Hearst's New York Journal-American suggests Truman must be on drugs, and the press, specifically the more conservative outlets, calls for Truman's impeachment, though Republican Party leadership says that's not something they're going to attempt. A bunch of senators and congressmen do not get that memo, though. Joseph McCarthy calls the dismissal a communist victory won with the aid of bourbon and Benedictine. The son of a bitch should be impeached. That is what a lot of the country thinks. And these first few days, there are very few top Democrats defending Truman. MacArthur is invited to speak to a joint meeting of Congress, not a joint session, which would be an affair of state, but a voluntary gathering. Then they have to agree on the format. MacArthur obviously wants to speak his piece publicly, as do the Republicans, over radio and television. This the Democrats do not agree to for reasons of national security. By necessity, the hearings deal with military secrets. Though Time magazine will write that partisan politics keep MacArthur's thundering rhetoric out of earshot of the microphone and his dramatic profile off the screens of 12 million television sets. 12 million television sets in the United States. Already here in 1951. Texaco Star Theater with Milton Berle, or Uncle Milty, is the most popular program these days. But when he started hosting the show 3 years ago, there were only around 500,000 sets in the U.S. So, the hearings won't be broadcast, but an address by MacArthur will. Truman did actually, the night after sacking MacArthur, give a national radio broadcast about it, and then, for the first time, he mentioned his plans to try to reach a negotiated settlement with the Chinese, which MacArthur sandbagged. I covered that last month. There is now one prominent Democrat who is not afraid to speak up, Oklahoma Senator Robert Kerr, who has this to say: "The Republicans are dodging the real issue. If they believe that the future security of the nation depends on following the MacArthur policy, let them submit a resolution that we should either declare war against Red China or do that which amounts to open warfare against her. If they do not, their support of MacArthur is a mockery." They do not take the bait. Truman does not like MacArthur personally, but orders him to be received in D.C. with full military honors. And government workers and schools only have half days, so everyone can greet him. MacArthur is there for 20 hours, and 500,000 people cheer him during that time. And half of that is in front of the Washington Monument. It was a political and geopolitical confrontation of the utmost gravity and presented the country with the ultimate kind of constitutional crisis. David Reed, a reporter for the United Press, will recall that it's the only time in his life he thought the U.S. government was in genuine danger, and that if MacArthur tells the crowd to take the city, they will. He doesn't, of course. It was as if the country were about to explode with long-suppressed rage from all the frustrations of this new, unsatisfying post-war incarnation. The struggle seemed to cut across every fault line in the country. In a way that few understood at the time, it was a kind of giant anti-war rally, a reflection of a kind of national frustration with a conflict that was so unsatisfying and distant and gray and brought so little in the way of victories. It bridged eras in a way. It was the last hurrah for a great hero of World War II, combined with a powerful, visceral protest by a nation that did not enjoy its new superpower status. It was produced by almost equal parts of love and anger. It was powerful stuff. On April 19th, 1951, at 12:31 p.m., Douglas MacArthur enters Congress to thunderous applause and speaks. There is a link in the comments if you want to go and read the transcript of the whole thing, and another link if you want to hear it. He argues the same case he's been arguing with the Joint Chiefs for months, which I've gone over time and again, and which they've rejected time and again. And he also says that under no circumstances must Formosa fall to communist China. And when talking about the Korean War, he has this to say: while no man in his right mind would advocate sending out ground forces into continental China, I feel that military necessity in the conduct of the war made necessary. 1. Intensification of our economic blockade against China. 2. Imposition of a naval blockade against the China coast. 3. Removal of restrictions on air reconnaissance of China's coast and of Manchuria. 4. Removal of restrictions on the Chinese nationalists on Formosa, with logistical support to contribute to their effective operations against the Chinese mainland. He goes on to say that for this he's been criticized in lay circles, but his views are in fact shared by practically every military leader involved with Korea, including the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Yeah, that last part is a lie. In their January 12th list of recommendations, those 4 points are there, sure, but only as options to possibly pursue if and only if the Chinese launch all-out aerial and ground assaults. See? MacArthur is calling Truman, and I guess Secretary of State Dean Acheson, civilians who overrode the military leaders about military matters. That might come back to haunt him. For the moment, however, it provokes yet another outburst of cheers and applause. He goes on to complain about not getting reinforcements in Korea and not being allowed to utilize the Chinese nationalists on Formosa, and says he will not appease communist China. He also says he's the general that actually went into the foxholes and talked with the troops on the line. Joseph Golden has this to say about that. No contemporary account of MacArthur's visits to Korea mentions any pauses to chat with troops. That a foot soldier would deign to raise strategic questions with such a regal commander as MacArthur belies credulity. His statement was theatrical hokum. Hokum, I tell you. Okay, he ends quite emotionally. When I joined the army, even before the turn of the century, it was the fulfillment of all my boyish hopes and dreams. The hopes and dreams have long since vanished, but I still remember the refrain of one of the most popular barracks ballads of that day, which proclaimed most proudly that old soldiers never die, they just fade away. And now, like the old soldier of that ballad, I now close my military career and just fade away, an old soldier who tried to do his duty as God gave him the light to see that duty. Goodbye. I would end there normally, because that's a pretty good ending speech, but I'm not going to, for there is just one more thing. This morning, April 22nd, aerial recon does report that enemy formations are assembling and moving forward north of both 1st and 9th Corps positions. Later on, civilians entering 1st Corps lines from the north confirmed the enemy approaching. At 5 p.m., U.S. 25th Division aerial observers report long columns of trucks heading down Route 33 towards the Turkish brigade positions. Airstrikes disperse the column, but by 6 p.m., enemy foot soldiers are spotted on the road in force. In front of 24th Division, advancing enemy columns are brought under fire as they reach artillery range, but the approaching forces seem to just accept the casualties and keep on assembling above the center of the division's front. At 7 p.m., Division Commander Blackshear Bryan tells 1st Corps headquarters he expects to be attacked in about 2 hours and that the offensive they've been waiting for is about to hit them. He is correct almost to the exact minute, for tonight, the massive Chinese spring offensive begins.